You're listening to the Sportsman's Nation Podcast Network, brought to you by Federal Premium Ammunition and their new centerfire rifle ammunition, Terminal Ascent. Now, the Terminal Ascent has a slipstream polymer tip that helps flatten trajectories and initiates low-velocity expansion at longer ranges. The Terminal Ascent gives you match-grade long-range accuracy in a bonded hunting bullet, and it comes in a variety of cartridges, including the 6.5 Creedmoor, the 280 Ackley Improved, the 28 Nosler, the 7mm Remington Mag 30-06, and the 300 Win Mag. If you want to find more information about the Terminal Ascent, visit federalpremium.com, and while you're there, check out It's Federal Season, the official podcast of Federal Ammunition.
My name is Clay Newcomb, and I'm the host of the Bear Hunting Magazine podcast. I'll also be your host into the world of hunting the icon of North American wilderness, the bear. We'll talk about tactics, gear, conservation, but we'll also bring you into some of the wildest country on the planet, chasing bear. I want to describe what this podcast is about and kind of the style that we used on this podcast. If you've listened to us very long, you know that we have a lot of long-form conversational style podcasts that don't necessarily have a specific topic. Maybe we're interviewing an old hunter or a houndsman or a deer hunter or whatever. Sometimes we have podcasts that are very technical and tactical, and we try to just get down to business and really educate people. That's what this is. So this podcast, I have gathered up the best black bear hunters that I know in where I live, Heath Martin and Ryan Greb. And these guys have taken baiting bears to a whole nother level of expertise. And so we nerd out for an hour and a half about all things pertaining to baiting black bears. And I think you can use this information anywhere in the country that's legal to bait. I think this information would be valuable for spring hunters and fall hunters, but most of what we're talking about is specifically fall hunting. We talk about how to set up a bait, what bait to use, how long do you bait, how do you target big bears, what's the baiting routine that you use, and how do you utilize a strategic routine on the day that you hunt to target these big bears. I also think that even if you're not interested in baiting bears, you could learn about bear behavior. I have learned more about bear behavior from watching how they interact with food source on an unnatural bait than I have any other way, because the sheer exposure that you get to animal behavior, bear behavior, is exponential. If I only gathered information from watching bears on natural food, I would have very limited understanding of what bears do, because it's just so hard to find them doing what they do, especially in the east and thick cover. So watching bears over bait, understanding what they do, how they utilize that, is the same way that they utilize natural food sources out in wild places. So this is a great podcast. It'll go in the archives, and when somebody direct messages me and say, "Hey Clay, I'm starting to bait, can you give me any tips?" I'm going to send them this podcast. You listen from this to start to finish, and you will learn a decade worth of three guys who've pretty much dedicated themselves to hunting big bears over bait in a pretty pressured area. When this podcast was done, I turned to Heath and I said, "Man, if somebody would just listen to that and really heed the advice that was given, they would learn what it took us 10 years to learn." The last thing that I want to say as a preface to a podcast about baiting bears is that a lot of people don't understand baiting. And I think if you listen to this podcast, you'll see how much work it is, how much strategy goes into it, how much thought goes into it, and you'll have an appreciation for that. I want to say that wherever that we're baiting bears, the management agencies are using this as a management tool to harvest the number of bears that we need out of that habitat, and that's just it. It is a management tool and a highly effective management tool. And you know what? If 1,000 years from now, anthropologists are going through the fossil record, which would include us, and they perceived bear baiting activity, and they were like, wow, these ancient hunters put out bait for bears. What that would indicate to them is high bear populations that needed to be managed. Are you with me? Are you tracking me? Basically, baiting bears is a management tool that actually indicates success of a species that needs to be managed. So this whole premise that baiting is, somehow not fair chase, not difficult, that's an old world mentality that is no longer relevant. It's a management tool, and bear baiting allows a hunter to be selective. The least selective hunting that Clay Newcomb does is a spot and stalk hunt, because I usually shoot the first bear I see. I pass incredible amounts of bear when I'm hunting over bait, waiting for an older mature male, which is the perfect animal to take out of the population. And so in terms of ethics as well, when you're talking about shot placement, you know exactly where that bear is going to be. You strategically set up your stand and the bait in such a way that the animal is turned in the right direction. You have all these factors that you can control. And I think that's highly important inside of a time when really we're inside of a culture war, in a sense, where people don't understand our way of life. They don't understand our methodology for harvesting game, utilizing the meat, just our lifestyle of hunting. And so being educated on why we do what we do is incredibly important, and you've heard us say it, because we've got to guard the gate. Hunting bears and large predators is often the place that the anti-hunting community finds fault with North American hunting. And I don't think we've done a great job of even understanding why we do what we do. And so we've got to guard the gate, build a strong understanding of why we do what we do. And I think that will help preserve the whole of North American hunting. You're going to enjoy this podcast about the secrets to baiting black bears. Yep, I love baiting some black bears. We are in Heath Martin's office. We're looking at a bunch of big, nice whitetails, a big British Columbian moose, big 504-pound Arkansas black bear over here on the rocks. So I've got Heath Martin. Heath, this is your first time on the podcast.
Correct.
You've been due for a long time for a Bear Hunting Magazine podcast. So I think we talked about doing a bear-related podcast probably last year, because you're I'll get to the introduction of you after I talk about Ryan Flintface Greb. You've been on the podcast several times, Ryan.
Yeah, a few times. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, you two are like, to me, this is like the, I don't know if there are any sports that just have 3 players, but you guys are like the dream team of at least Arkansas black bear hunting. And I've said this before about Ryan, and I'll say it again, because unless somebody disputes me, and Heath, maybe you can, and if you can, you can. I think per volume of bears killed in the state of Arkansas, I think if you just added the weight of every bear you've ever killed, I think Ryan's killed the most bear by volume of any person I've met. There may be people I've not met, but this guy's killed a 300-plus pound bear every year, just about, for the last 20 years. It's been a couple of years interspersed. You've killed good ones. I mean, is that true?
Yeah.
Or have you been lying to me?
No. Y'all take y'all rotate every other year, so y'all probably stay up with me if you stay after them. So did you hunt last year?
No,
Heath?
I haven't bear hunted the last couple of years.
Yeah. Well, okay. And then Heath has killed, he's the only person in the state of Arkansas that's killed 2 Boone and Crockett bears.
Monsters.
That's
Monsters,
correct.
500-plus pound.
Yeah, skulls are right there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, that's, and you've killed many, many big bears. But, everybody kind of does things different. Like I've killed just a handful of bears personally over bait in the state of Arkansas. I don't think a lot of people realize that.
But you've catered to.
Yeah.
But every year for the last 20 years, I've baited extensively, and I've usually tried to. So, I mean, it just in Heath, you have baited extensively for periods of time, and then you've been going on some of these big game hunts at prime time, and that's a big deal when you're baiting bears. Is you got to be here. It's a ton of work for about a month before season. And so if you're gone during that time period, it doesn't even make sense to even try. And so the last couple of years, you've been gallivanting across the planet, killing big game and all these crazy places.
That's correct. Leaving next week for Alaska Peninsula moose hunt. So I won't be baiting this year. Be there most of September. So
yeah. Well, the thing most I respect about both you guys is that you're good. You've learned. You've learned what it takes to be successful, not just with bears, but with big bears. And you guys know as well as anybody that you got to do a lot of things right to kill big bears consistently, really anywhere. And so what I want to do today is just kind of nerd out about baiting bears. And, there's a lot of different people that listen to this podcast. I mean, there's guys that listen to this podcast that don't even bear hunt. There's guys that listen to this podcast that don't bait bears, but we always have to, at some point, narrow down the focus to just hone in into like this one area,
Right.
And so what I want to do with y'all is kind of take somebody from start to finish of the key components of baiting bears. And then we can also talk about kind of like the advanced technical side of killing big bears. Because there's a big difference. Yes. Wouldn't you say, Heath? Just from, like if a guy anywhere that can bait bears, and there's quite a few states that you can bait in, a lot of the all the Canadian provinces pretty much. There's a big difference between just killing a bear and killing a big bear. Wouldn't you say, Heath?
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, let's. So I've kind of got a list here. I'll go ahead and read the list of what I want to cover, just so if you're listening to this, you can kind of track what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about where to place a bait site. So I want to hear about you guys' experience on actually where to place it. A lot of guys have questions about that, and what I've learned is that two places in the same county can be absolutely a wonderful place to kill a big bear, and a mile away you have a difficult time even killing a bear. So just because you're in a good county, just because you're in a good state, doesn't mean that your bait site's going to be in the best place. And on a micro scale, there's always a best place. No matter if you've got 40 acres or if you've got 5,000 acres, there's one spot that's going to be the best, I feel like. So we're going to talk about where to place the bait, what type of feeders to use. That never entered my mind that was a big deal, but people ask me all the time about.
Get questions on that?
Yeah. Like what kind, are you using bait barrels, plastic or metal? So I want to talk about that. Let's see here. Oh, my list. How far in advance to start feeding bears. We can talk about timing, what type of bait and how much. There's all kind of controversy in the bear world about how much to feed bears. There's the philosophy that you feed them a small amount, and there's also a philosophy that you give them as much as you can eat. And I think I know where you guys stand on that. Scent attractants, and then we'll talk about how to target big bears, and then I want to hear about y'all's routine for opening day. I think that is the biggest mistake that people make, and I have made it, and I've learned stuff from you guys, is that you have this routine of baiting, and then on opening day, what you do is really, really important, especially if you're targeting a big bear. And then the last question I have written down in my notes here is, what is the proper way to celebrate when you kill a 500-pound bear? But you guys both would know that.
Go get the tractor.
Go get the tractor.
Hope you can get the tractor to it.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
Yeah.
Because if you can't, the work begins.
Heath, tell me a little bit about your, like, when you started baiting and you know, how you started approaching, you know, hunting where you did. W Hunting Supply. My friend Buddy Woodbury and his team in Washington, these guys have built the best hound supply, dog supply company in the country. If you have any needs that have to do with dogs, check out W. Check them out, man. They're one of the top Garmin dealers in the country. They are, but more than that, they're Garmin experts. So you can call them and tell them what you're trying to achieve. They'll tell you what products you need. You have trouble setting those products up, you call them and you're going to talk to a person that knows that product. For all of your dog-related needs, check out W Hunting Supply and our friends up in Washington. CVA muzzleloaders. I am very pumped about muzzleloader hunting this year. I'm going to be using a CVA. CVA was a company that was started in 1971, and they produce the best muzzleloaders on the planet. They produce breakover muzzleloaders that you can clean and take apart without having to use a tool. They're known for accuracy. They're a sleek-looking gun. It's a sharp-looking gun. CVA has everything you need, full line of muzzleloaders, all the way from, you know, price point type muzzleloaders that would be like entry-level stuff, all the way to very accurate, long-range, very high-end muzzleloaders, and everything in between. Check out CVA for your muzzleloader hunting this fall in 2020. Man, we can't talk about bait and bears without Northwoods. Northwoods bear products, they make the best bear scents that we have used. Incredible product, and they've got a full line of commercial scents. If you're baiting bears this fall, man, order some Northwoods bear products. You've heard me say it 1,000 times, and I'll keep saying it. I love the Gold Rush, mixing it in with fryer grease. It's a vital component to my baiting strategy. These commercial scents have stronger scent power than any kind of natural food that you could use. So you might say, oh, I can draw in bears with natural food, but you'll draw in more bears with commercial scents. So check out Northwoods bear products. Hunting where you did.
Oh, yeah. So probably my first serious dive into baiting is around 2007. I think I killed my first bear in 2007, actually. And I believe, if I remember right, that year it was just over a corn feeder. So it was very dry. It was dry. It wasn't a lot of work. I had never killed a bear. First bear that walked by, I shot it and was tickled to death, not knowing I'd ever shoot another bear. Because in our reality, in the last 10, 12, 14 years, our population has exploded tremendously. Yeah. I mean, now it's something you have a chance to kill every year. Even in 2007, it was really the first bear I'd ever seen that I'd had an opportunity to hunt, right?
Right.
So then that kind of gave me the bug, I guess you would say. And so I'm sure through conversation with you and other people, I started figuring out how to bait and just trial and error, you know. So it's like, well, dog food and grease, you know. So then the next year I baited a little more, and corn and dog food and sweets. And you know, getting bait is tough. Getting sweets, you know, we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But you got a question on there, so we can talk about that later. But I got lucky and killed that bear, I believe I think I killed him in 2009, actually. So I don't think I killed a bear in 2008. And, but got some bear pictures, learned some stuff baiting, you know, trial and error, and then upped my game a little bit, was a little more serious about it, and killed my first Boone and Crockett bear. Was my second bear ever. So, I mean, a little luck involved, but still was able to harvest him once I got him coming to bait, you know. And then, from there, I just was pretty serious about it and learned from trial and error, figured stuff out, you know, tried to get better at getting better quality food to feed them and figure out what worked good. And, you know, a lot of it's based on where we hunt, not other places in the country maybe, but tremendously on mast
Yeah,
The
that's a theme anywhere they're baiting.
Yeah.
It may not be hard masked,
but yeah, right. But
Food stores.
and it's all the seasons too. You know, so our season always opens as or after the hard mast is falling, right? So
Right.
that's just, and it depends on when opening day is. You know, that's a whole conversation. So you got to figure out how to keep bears. Big bears, you guys know, will leave a barrel of donuts overnight for a white oak acre.
That's
It's
right.
just insane.
They're wired for natural food.
I know
Yep.
it. It's crazy. So, you know, I had to kind of start learning how to keep bears as good as I can. And just because you do some of this stuff don't mean you're going to keep that bear.
A quick question. Do you have much competition over around where you hunt?
human competition.
Yeah.
I think there's probably some, you know, there for a while when I got real serious about it, I had 3 bait locations over about a 12 square mile area. Basically 4 miles and 4 miles and 4 miles, kind of a triangle
That's
shape.
spaced out good.
Spaced out to where I wasn't fighting myself, right?
Right.
But in all reality, there was a time or two when I would get the same big bear on 2 of those baits.
Really?
randomly,
4 miles
4
apart.
miles apart.
And I bet you had a lot more competition than you realize.
I think there is, right? Absolutely. But a couple of my most successful spots were harder to get into, and the competition would be, I think, a little further away because of the way the block of national forest adjoining our property.
so we can only bait on
We can only
private
bait on
land.
private land, but the land I would bait on borders some national forest blocks. And so if they're big enough and remote enough, you don't have people right on you baiting, right?
Yeah.
So you're attracting bears out of that large block of national forest into your private property, you know, where you can legally bait at that point.
So you can pretty safely assume that unless somebody's doing something illegal,
Yeah.
if you got this giant block of national forest, that nobody's baiting bears.
Correct.
Now, they can hunt bears there,
Yeah.
but they can't bait a bear.
Yeah.
And around here, you know, there's only, even in giant blocks of national forest, there's some private back there somewhere.
Yeah.
So somebody could be, but there's a couple blocks. There's a mile and a half blocks that nobody's in,
Yeah.
which is not that big for a bear in
No.
all reality.
Yeah.
But if you get one sometimes that likes to stay there and hold tight, and you really got what he likes to eat, you can keep him on a pretty good pattern.
Yeah. Now you tell me about your competition, Ryan, where you're at.
I did have some guys, you know, 1.5, 2 miles from me, and they took big bears. And
Yeah.
you know who we're talking about. And I know Heath does because he actually just sold the property just a year or 2 ago. But yeah, that was, it didn't seem to be really a factor because we both understood that we were chasing big bears, not average bears.
Yeah.
And we communicated back and forth, but we were really remote, didn't have any really 4-wheeler traffic or people in and out, even deer hunting them.
So it was almost like a buddy was baiting. So you kind of knew what was going on.
Yeah. But it just happened to be luck out, and it's just a place that holds big bears, and always did, and still does to this day.
Well, let's talk about where to put a bear bait.
I think that's key too, and I'm sure we'll get to that later. But I mean, just because you go put a bait in the woods, don't mean you're going to kill a mature bear.
That's
They're not
right.
all created equal, and I can attest that to all my bait sites, and we can talk about that.
Yeah.
When we
well,
segue
that's
that
what
direction.
I want to talk about. There's two things that I want to analyze. So if you're taking this really serious, like we all have at different times, like there was one time when I was baiting 11 different spots in a good county in Arkansas, and every year I would end up having 2 to 3 spots that I was willing to put somebody on to hunt when it came down to season. And finally, I just got to where I didn't bait the other 8 places because they just didn't produce. Now, could I get bears to come in there? Yes. But by the time season arrived, the big bears would be gone, or all the bears would be gone.
or were big bears even coming to it?
Right. And most of them, no.
I've abandoned sites for that reason too. We had 3 when we were really heavy. 3 main sites. 2 always produced giant bears. Now they may not be there come season, but there was always giant bears in the
Right.
area. A third one we probably baited 4 years, and there was always quite a few bears there. And there would actually be bears there come season. That one year I killed that big double tag old sow that had
Right,
been
yeah, I
tracked a
remember.
couple times. She came off of that bait site. But she's probably the biggest bear that in 4 years that ever came to that bait site.
340-pound sow.
She's a big sow, but
Yeah.
the point of that was there was never. I mean, I'm not going to say a 250-pound sow didn't, or a boar didn't walk by that bait occasionally, but there was never a sure enough mature boar ever in 4 years come to that bait site.
And that's a fantastic point, because some places produce big bears
Yeah.
and some don't. And when we say big bears, we're not talking about a 250-pound male. We're talking about a 400-plus pound
trophy,
ultra mature big bear.
And we finally abandoned this site because it was really remote. In theory, it had everything what I thought should have to grow, hold, and be able to bait mature bears. It took a long time to get there. It's hard to bait, which is some of the keys. But after 4 years, it's like, I mean, I've never had a mature boar come here. Why am I still baiting here? So we kind of abandoned that site, in our reality, and killed just as many bears off the 2 that we had, and not had to put as much work or bait somewhere that we weren't really ever hunting. I mean, I did kill the one bear there, but of all those years, that's the only time we ever even hunted there. It was one day I hunted that site, one day in 4 years, and it was the only bear.
So what are the characteristics of the good sites that tend to draw big bears?
Man, thickness, just quietness, no intrusion.
By quietness, you mean like not a county road,
Remote.
No,
half mile away.
Remote.
Yep. Bears like to bed a lot of times in low areas with lots of shade, preferably maybe some damp, areas. But, each piece of land has a story to tell, and it may take you a couple years to totally understand how the animals move on this piece of ground.
Right.
So,
and in our reality, my opinion of that too sometimes is I don't know if there's a right answer to your question. I mean, I think sometimes there's a spot almost like a deer or a fish, which there's usually a reason a fish likes to be here versus even a big deer. And that's all of our first love was deer. But I don't know why there was never a big boar in this one spot. To me, it was perfect, right?
Yeah.
But there never was. But then there's these 2 other spots. It's like, I mean, every time a bear comes in, not every bear, but there's always big boars coming in.
There's always a big one.
And to me, they're all fairly similar in characteristics, So why did the one never produce, but the other 2 always had a mature, and usually the other 2 had multiple mature bears coming in, maybe not by season, but throughout the baiting time frame.
and you can kill 1 or 2 of them, and then another one.
Yeah,
next year.
Next year they'll be back in.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
It is one of them deals where they're all.
We did a last week. We had a biologist on the podcast, and she was talking about how the female bears, they're the ones that they're mainly tracking and understanding what they're doing. And these female bears will select to live in areas that are as remote from human intrusion as possible. Like they don't like roads. They don't like human houses. Like if a bear is not stressed, and obviously people have bears coming to their houses and eating their trash cans and stuff in the summertime and periods of stress. But those bears want to be in unfragmented wilderness. And we'll use the term wilderness not as in capital wilderness, like capital W wilderness, like federal land, but wilderness in terms of wherever you live, the most remote. If it's in Michigan, it's going to be the deepest, darkest swamp that has the least human intrusion. If it's in Arkansas, it's going to be that rugged drainage that, has big national forest on every side, and it's just hard to get to. And that's where those are typically the places that we're going to be able to draw big bears.
And that's one reason the baiting in Arkansas, when we talk about sometimes they're not there come season, is that way. We can only bait on that private land. And I think that's key because even though we find remote land that we can bait on privately, it's not as remote as maybe in the summer or before the acorns start falling, they're coming to that bait. But we all know as soon as acorns falling, they're gone. They're way back somewhere else in a more remote area. Right?
I don't think the acorns really even have to fall. If they're somewhat mature and the trees are loaded, they're going to climb to the top.
They're climbing trees. I bet 50% of the bears in the state of Arkansas right now don't have their feet on the ground.
That's right.
They're in a tree right now. It's evening time.
So that's what makes it harder sometimes to keep these bears when we say on a bait. It's because it's not where, if we could put it wherever we wanted to, they'd probably be easier to
kill. If
we
could, like in Idaho, you can bait on national forest.
Right.
And we could put a bait out right where they're going to want to be and have a better chance. So we're limited in where we can bait them. So we have a hard time holding them once the natural mass becomes available. And we'll talk about some tricks that we've all used to try to hold them. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about, so we've established and it's kind of a no-brainer, but for some people that are just getting used to understanding bears, it's probably helpful to hear us say the most remote place you can get. If we could boil it down to something that simple. But, okay, here's the next scenario. You got 40 acres that you can bait, okay? And you drive into that 40 acres down on a low creek, and there's one high knob on this place that's maybe connected to a string of mountains. My philosophy is that on that 40 acres, even where you put that bait is important. Like, you can't choose anywhere outside of that 40 acres. But I've always been of the persuasion that higher is better than lower because of wind. Like, more consistent winds. And anytime I've tried to bait down low, the evening time thermals make it really hard. Right. Have you guys had different experience than that? Your bait isn't super high, is it?
I agree with you 100% to some degree.
Okay.
I do.
Well, then you don't agree with me 100%, Heath.
I agree with you 98%. I do it probably a little different, and the reason I do it is, if we want to dive into that, where you place your bait is my most successful places I've learned. And I'm not talking to hunt a bear, we're talking to kill a mature bear, because you have to outsmart his nose, just what you're talking about, the thermals and stuff. So the best way I've found to do it in where we hunt, the way the ridges and stuff lay out, is I always, and this 40 acres may not have the perfect spot, but if I had the perfect spot, here's how it is for me. And the two that are most successful for me are not exactly identical. The one at our farm you've been to is not exactly perfect, but it's close. The one that I killed this bear on is the best spot I've ever been on. So I get on the downhill side, not bottom of the hill, but I like to be on a secondary point that comes off a main ridge, a short secondary point, 30 or 40 yards. It just juts off and then it dives off, right? And it's got deep drains on both sides of this secondary point. And it's always on the north side of the mountain because we have southwest winds
dominant
that
wind,
time of year.
Early fall.
But also the bigger thing, like you talked about, was the thermals. So I always set my baits up on the very end of this secondary, not my bait, my stand. I put the bait up on this secondary point, but I set my stand on the slightly downhill side on the very end of the secondary point where it's steep. And I'm not saying the bears can't come in below or behind you, but it isn't their preferred path.
They're most likely just going to travel down that finger. They're most likely going to
come down the main ridge, go right around the head of the draw this way or this way, come right onto this finger, and they're always on the south side of you. And as soon as the sun starts setting behind the trees, the thermals start sucking your scent off that point down those two draws down in the valley below. And
that's why we hired him.
That's right.
The brains, man. So that's a really good description of a place.
Typically, the way you would do that is because we're baiting on private property that's really close to national forest. I mean, usually the fence ain't far, 50, 60 yards, but we're on private property. You're baiting, or the bears typically aren't going to be behind you in that situation anyway, because your private property's down there.
Right.
They're coming from this bigger block of national forest, right? So they're coming from that direction. So you got your south wind, then you get your thermal shift, and it sucks your scent off down behind you. And I mean, you rarely ever, as long as your wind's right and your thermals are good, you rarely ever get winded. And that's how I've tried to set up all the two. And the one at our farm ain't exactly like that. We are on the downhill that you've been to of a secondary point. It's not as steep as I would want it, but I don't have anywhere else to put it. So because we've run out of private property, right?
Well, the theme of what you're saying is that you need to think about where you're putting your bait. Yeah. You need to think about prevailing winds.
I'm not down in the bottom.
Right.
I'm up high, but I'm not on the tip of the ridge. I get on the kind of the bottom end of that secondary point and have the thermals suck my scent away and down the drains behind me and try to keep the bears above me, right?
Yeah.
And then also you can be 20 foot in a tree and your bait's over here at 18 yards. Well, it's up a little bit anyway, so it's
You're just
pretty
shooting
easy
straight across.
shot. It ain't
And
straight, but
I think it's worth saying that we're all hunting in the evenings.
yeah.
Yeah.
And bow. During that time of year, it's all bow.
That's right.
You know.
So we got to be close.
Yeah.
And we are primarily hunting in the evening time. I mean, like almost 90.
Yeah.
Do you, all your hunting's in the evening?
Yeah, all
I've
evening.
called you on the opening morning of bear season, and you were drinking coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't hunt mornings.
I mean, that's the way I am
Yeah.
too. Opening day of bear season, I sleep in.
Yeah.
We hunt them in the evening, and we do that on purpose because these big bears are feeding overnight. If you try to slip in, this is a little bit off topic from where to place a bait, but I'm going to say it because it's not in my notes. People all the time ask me, well, maybe we would get into it, when to hunt. If you're hunting a big bear, don't even risk hunting him in the morning. Now, you might kill him in the morning, but there's a better chance that you're going to spook him off the bait or you're going to spook bears. And so all the big bears we've killed have been in the evening time. And we choose not to hunt in the morning because those bears are in there all night. So if you're trying to slip in there with a flashlight before daylight,
They're still at the bait.
There's
There's
still
a
at the
bear
bait.
still at the bait. May not be the one you want to kill, but there's a bear at the bait you're going to bump off of there.
yep.
And
Yeah.
it's going to make noise and racket. And
Going in there in the dark, the flashlight, the most unnatural thing you could do.
That's right.
You know.
And even if you don't bump the target bear, I'm pointing at a 500-pound bear mounted over here. He got that big because he took social cues from that bear's bedded 120 yards away. He hears a bear woof and run off. And, he goes downwind to check, and he's like, yep, that fool's in the tree stand.
We're talking about mature bears, but certain people might just have access to flat ground. It might just be a
Right.
pine timber stand, and there's no kind of features. And, they may be able to drive right to the side of the road and have to backpack something in. And not saying don't go try it. If that's all you got to do. But maybe understand the lay of the forest that's leading in to this property to give you an idea where you want to maybe put some bait and, hang a stand. But, yeah, not everybody's going to have prime spots.
right, yeah. And I'm just talking from experience on the property I hunt.
Yeah.
If you put me on a flat 40 acres, I probably wouldn't know where to put the bait.
That's right.
And that's where these guys that like bait up in Michigan and different places, like they're using terrain features of the swamp.
Right.
Like, they're backing up against a big swamp that, the bears aren't going to come from that direction. And so the point of hearing Heath dissect how he sets up his bait sites is that you can do the same thing on your land for whatever it is. Like, you just got to think about it.
That's right.
You don't set a bear, if you want to kill big bears, you don't set a bear bait based upon ease of access for you. That's the biggest thing. Like, when I've helped people, it's like, man, we got to find a place I can drive the truck and it's easy. And now, granted, that's nice. And most of the places I can drive a truck where I go. But, like, the point of it is not for you. The point is, where is that bear
Most
going to be comfortable in the daytime? Because you're asking that bear to do a lot, a big bear. You're asking him to come into a feeding area in the broad daylight in a place that he knows there's a human involved. That's the thing that's so different about this than deer hunting. A deer hunting situation, that deer doesn't know there's a human around. Ultra ninja stealth is what you're trying to do, especially if you're not hunting over feed or something. But with this bear, that big 500-pound bear knows there is a human involved. You can't really hide that, at least around here when it's so hot.
Well, and their nose is better than a deer's nose, right? I mean, we've had this is a whole nother story, but, I know you killed the big bear finally out of the redneck scent type blind you'd hunted for a few years. We had that conversation for years. I'm like, Clay, the best way to kill bears in a blind, but I'm not buying a blind just to go bear hunting.
That's right.
Because you got to fool their nose.
Yep.
So that's why I kind of did what I started doing on the end of them points and ridges, was just using the thermals as much as I could to try to help my scent. But yeah, I mean, you got to fool their nose. And I mean, these bears, they sit out there and listen. This bear here came up and just happened I could see him, probably not 30 minutes, but 20 minutes before dark. And he'd just sit there like a dog, just listen.
Wait, 60, 70
Yeah,
yards
out
out.
there, way out there. Yeah, 100 yards probably, 120. And then it just happened to be kind of an opening through the woods that I catch him,
Yeah.
and then he'd get up and I'm like, oh, here he comes. He'd take like 2 steps and he'd sit back down, listen and sniff around and listen. And, by the time he came to 100 yards, it's almost dark. I couldn't see him, right? Well, I saw that, but had I not seen that, I wouldn't have known. You wouldn't know. And they're different than a little 200-pounder that just comes walking in because he wants to eat a donut, right? They have a whole different personality.
Yeah.
So, and he may have been bedded just 150 yards all day. I don't know, but he could have been listening the whole time.
That is my persuasion on what they're doing when they're pounding a bear bait.
They ain't going far.
They're not far.
No. Man, so last year we tracked a bear that we didn't recover, and we went off of this bear bait and hit a bear trail, and this bear just went straight off the side of the mountain, and I mean it was like following a cattle trail, and we're seeing just little specks of blood, and we pretty much knew this bear wasn't that hurt. It was a different hunter I was helping, and that bear went right to a place that looked like the Bear Holiday Inn. Really, it was down in a super steep draw, pawpaw patch with boulders. It was the nastiest place on the side of that mountain. And he had a spot wore out on the ground. I mean, it's big as, I don't know.
Yeah, 10 foot.
He spent a lot of time right there.
That was his bedroom.
250 yards from the bait site. And he just woke up, went to the bait, went laid back down. He had no reason to go anywhere else. So, I mean,
I'm sure this bear was doing the same. I didn't follow his trail out, but he wasn't going a couple 100 yards,
Yeah.
And that's why this is another topic, but being consistent on later your question on the opening day of season.
Yeah.
They hear you when you go bait them bear. I mean, when you go bait and stuff. And so if you're out of routine, they can figure that out, and it may just cause them to come in 30 minutes later because they're being extra cautious or something,
Yeah.
So, I mean, when I go bait,
well, let's talk about that baiting routine. That's a key point for killing big bears. Go ahead.
Well, most of the baits I set up are steep and rugged, my 2 most successful ones, but I do have them set up because, let me kind of back up a little bit. The population has gotten so large where we hunt. Most people I don't think would believe us, but the last time I truly baited hard, I had 40 different bears hitting 3 bait sets. So the sheer volume of bait we have to put out to feed 40 bears for 2 weeks or 30 days or whatever you decide to bait to try to have one there come opening day, you can't carry all that in. So I can't drive a truck to any of mine, but I can drive a side-by-side.
Yeah.
So, and they get used to that. You go in there, you drive the side-by-side. At my bait sites, I put 2 55-gallon barrels of bait, plumb full, you're stacking it on top. And I'm not saying every year is exactly like that, but on a good baiting year, they're eating all that in a couple of days. Really.
When you're saying good baiting year, you mean not much mass, not much natural food.
And there's
hitting the bait hard.
Hitting the baits really hard, absolutely. When there's a lot of activity at a bait,
right.
Some years is going to be less for that very reason. But when you do hit it perfect and all the bears are hitting your bait, man, that year I was filling up that much bait every other day.
Yeah.
Or it was bone dry empty, not because I wanted to. It was we had to put out that much bait to keep bears coming. So I drive the side-by-side in there. You beat and bang around. I use metal barrels just because I can chain them to the tree, and they got the lid. I can bolt the ring down so they don't dump it out too much, right? And I'm not saying it's the best. It's just what I do. But I'm going to do that on opening day. I'm not going to have opening day be a day I miss, right? I'm going to get up. I'm going to drink coffee, whatever. At midday, I'm going to go check the cameras to see if my bear's still coming. Was he there last night before dark? I'm going to refresh the bait, make noise, just do my normal routine because just like we said, he's probably laying out there. If he was still there and hadn't left for the mass crop yet, he's not far. I guarantee you he can hear that ATV and you banging on that barrel when you're putting out bait, right? So I don't really try to be quiet when I'm putting out bait. Right. I mean, I don't.
You're not trying to hide your scent.
I don't try to maybe make too much extra noise, but I bang around and do my stuff and clink the barrel and hit it with the stick sometimes. And I got a funny story about that in Canada, but anyway, so that's what I do. Then we leave and then just try to slip in there, couple hours before dark or whatever time we want to go in that day. Then we're stealth about getting in there that time, but the
You
middle
don't
of
want them to know
yeah,
about
but
you
the middle of the day, I want them to think it's just another day. Man, he's come beating a bang. Them barrels are full of donuts. I'm going to go eat tonight.
Do you have a lot of your mature bears come in that evening, the day you bait?
Oh, yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
See, let me go back to baiting routine, and then we can jump right into the day.
Right.
But I think when you're baiting a bear, so you're trying to create this safe zone where this bear feels comfortable coming into your bait. And so the more consistent you can be, the better. Like even in terms of timing. Because what people run into is that they have jobs and they can't bait until like evening time. And I'm just going to describe best case scenario, and people can craft this to fit their life. But I think this is pretty best case scenario type stuff, is that I only bait my really good spots between about 11 and 2 during the day. Yeah. And I would rather miss a day of baiting than to go in there at 7 o'clock in the evening and blow that bear out.
I won't do it.
Yeah. So it's like the more predictable that you are, the more predictable your big bears are going to be. Because if he's in there strutting around at 6:30 in the afternoon thinking about what a great life he has eating all this bait, and for the last 10 days you've only been in there at midday, and he's like, man, that guy ain't coming back till tomorrow. And then you roll up on a side-by-side.
Or day after tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean,
you roll up and blow him out of there, man, you've spooked that. Now, the 200-pound bear,
he's going to sit out there and watch.
He doesn't care.
Yeah.
That guy right there pointing to the big bear over there, he cares.
Yeah.
Consistency.
He's either going nocturnal or he's not coming back.
Yeah.
That time of year. Now, you might get away with that 30 days before season.
Yep.
But the closer we get to season and you got photo period coming into play and other stuff, he's gone.
They get touchier. That's a great point. They get touchier, at least here.
Yeah.
Man, like right now, we could legally bait bears right now in Arkansas because we're under 30 days out. You could go out right now and make bear baiting look easy.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
You could put out.
Acorns aren't falling yet.
Yeah, I mean, bears would just be.
We're 2 weeks earlier in photo
coming
period.
in the daytime. Yeah. And then the closer you get to that end of September, more mass becomes available. These bears have this innate draw to want to get back into their natural fall ranges. And, boy, you mess up just a little bit, you can screw the thing up with the big bears.
Absolutely.
So the timing stuff or the consistency stuff, that's kind of my best ideas on it, is just be as consistent as possible. And if you can only bait in the evening times, if you work and you can only do it, just do it the same every time.
Yeah.
Just don't, just be consistent with whatever you do. Mm-hmm. You don't want to surprise that bear. But that's my thoughts on it.
The last couple hours of daylight is their time, and the last thing you want to do is have him nervous or on his toes, trying to win constantly, or you don't want to ruin that time in the evening. Well,
we're getting a little bit out of order, but that's fine. Let's talk about, Heath brought up like the day of the hunt. And that was great. So you're going to go in and bait like normal.
Check cameras, bait, do the normal stuff. I just think being consistent like that. Because like I said, on those, I'm not baiting every day. I'm baiting at least every other day, and I usually try to time it out where I don't bait the day before and I do bait the day of season, so it stays routine. Okay. I'm not saying that's 100% every year. Just depends on work and stuff too. But, I just think being routine like that is just key.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What about you, Ryan? What do you do?
I usually bait the day before season rolls in, bait real heavy. For me and where I'm hunting, seems like the mature bears don't want to come in as early. I mean, some years they do, but I've always done the day before season, bait real heavy, the day of, which, we probably all got cell cameras out nowadays. And
not me, I'm a traditionalist.
I understand. But,
you probably use a crossbow
too. But they would be good for
you?
a bear bait.
They
would be.
And I usually go
Did you
in.
hear what I said? I just threw you under the bus. I said you probably use a crossbow too, don't you?
No, I ain't that old yet. But no, usually slip in midday, and I may be a little stealthier than other people. I will usually try to find a water puddle, or if not, I'll grind my boots. Even though I think they're clean, I will grind them in a cedar limb or a pine limb, just little natural cover scent. When I'm walking in, which I have bears that will come down my baiting path to the bait, depending on which way the wind is, but I won't touch any saplings. I won't touch any foliage. My hands don't touch anything but what I'm carrying. And I will ease up that tree just as
You climb
quiet.
a tree stand without your hands?
No, I just feet only. But
I
get
thought
up
maybe
there.
you had an elevator,
No.
like a punch a button and
I wish.
it just takes you right to the top.
I don't own one of them redneck stands like you got.
Like us rich guys.
But no, I slip in just as quiet as a mouse, and that's.
So you go ninja on them on opening day.
I do. Don't always work, but that's just makes me feel better about that.
So what a trend I've seen, Heath, with my bears is that I feel like the big bears, like he's saying, will hit it hardest the day after I bait. I find a lot of times the big ones on the day I'm there are more nervous to come in. But the second day, it's like plenty of bait.
Well, because they probably came in that night and they know the barrels are full. So the next day they're hammering it,
Right.
Yeah.
And so I usually like to bait the day before, full throttle, just make noise, leave scent, and then slip in like a ninja at about 2 o'clock. And that's what I usually do. Like shooting light around that time of year. I don't know. It seems like it's getting dark about
7:15.
7:15. And so I'll try to get in way before peak movement. It seems like I always end up trying to get in there about about 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And set the last 4 hours. And, the last hour is really when you're going to kill one. But you don't want to get in there too late or you'll bump bears.
Quick question. Do y'all ever have these rogue bears that just sometimes they'll roll in at noon or 1 o'clock and
big ones?
Yeah. Big whoppers. Yeah. The booner I killed back in 2015, 2016, I never hardly got any nighttime pictures of that bear. Daylight, every hour of the day, he was guarding that bait site. I studied my pictures for a long time, and from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, I never hardly got any pictures of him. So I thought that opening day, I'm sneaking in right at 1 o'clock, and I want to ease in there without bumping him off. He come in as I was walking into the bait.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So
I remember that. You shot him off the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was able to took my boots off and sock feet and snuck up there within 9 yards and got an arrow in him.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But every
and that's unusual though. I'd say that's highly unusual for especially a Boone and Crockett bear.
Every 3 or 4 years, I always have this one mature bear that just does something opposite of what.
And you know what? That is really what we're trying to capitalize on.
Yeah.
It's like you can bait for 10 years. In 3 of those years, you're going to have a bear that just really cooperates.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rest of the time, it's just they're all like humans. They all have their own personality and the way they want to do things. They're all different. And I think a lot of it depends on what people may not think about is their previous experience at a bait site somewhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our bait site probably, if he's that old, that bear was 9, but I don't know, that bear was way older. They've been to a bait site somewhere before.
Yes.
Yeah.
How many human encounters have they had on bait? Have they been shot at before and missed or run off 2 or 3 times with an ATV or, who knows? So in their mind, we don't know what they're thinking because we don't have a clue first off, how old they even are and how many years of experience they've had at somebody else's bait who don't know maybe what they're doing or is not as careful or whatever,
Yeah.
I mean, you just don't know.
Yeah. Well, what we do know is that they they understand your patterns probably better than you understand your own.
Well, that's why I talk about the consistency.
Yeah.
Baiting on time, making the noise, and it makes them comfortable slide. Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
I killed a bear in Alberta one day we weren't seeing anything, and I climbed out of the tree and got a stick and banged on the barrel and climbed back in the stand. And before I got in the stand, bear come walking in. There wasn't no bait in it, but I banged on the barrel with the stick, and they were conditioned to that noise that somebody'd been there to bait.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm about to go bang on this barrel. I'm tired of not seeing nothing.
Yeah.
And it worked then. It wouldn't. I'm not saying it's going to work every time you do that.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
Everybody's bears are going to respond different too based upon where they're at. Like those Canadian bears are like, especially the wilderness bears.
They're not as cautious, right? Yeah.
They're not as cautious. These bears down here are going to be pretty cautious.
Yeah.
A lot of places in the U.S. where people are baiting, Maine, Michigan, Idaho. You almost have to hunt these bears like deer, But up in Canada, boy, you can just about anything goes. And if you're hunting younger bears, I remember one time we called in a bear in Arkansas. By called in, I got my air quotes up here. Me and that buddy were hunting, Lee Walt, my buddy Lee Walt, we were hunting. And we hunted the morning that year. It was when he just could only hunt one day or something. We did hunt the morning. He just wanted a bear. And we didn't have a big bear at this bait. We just had average bears. We went in there in the morning, sat there for an hour and a half, didn't see any bears, and I said, stay here. I climbed out of the tree, went and got the truck, drove the truck in there, slammed the door, drove the truck back out, walked back in, and in 20 minutes he'd shot a bear.
Wow.
Bear came in. He thought,
Yeah, it's your routine.
Yep.
He thought you just baited the barrel.
Just like hogs on a feeder, when it spins, here they come.
But that wouldn't have worked on that 500-pound bear.
No.
It wouldn't have worked at all.
No.
Well, hey, this is all good stuff. Let's march down our list. So how far in advance do you guys start feeding bears? Some states have regulations that you can only, you'll need to check your regs on the states. Like here in Arkansas, we can bait 30 days before season. In Oklahoma, there's no regulation on season. In Idaho, I believe some of those places out there, you can only bait like 7 days before season. But what's your thoughts, Ryan?
A new bait probably as soon as possible.
Okay.
Check inventory, established bait that's been there for years and years. Bears are already there. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, should be ample amount of time.
Because you don't, it seems like the rational thought would be, well, I'm going to bait them as long as possible. If you can start baiting in June, I'm going to start baiting in June. But there's a law of limited return, on a deal like this. Like there's a sweet spot because I've found, y'all tell me if we've all had these conversations together over the years, but it's all kind of blurred together. I feel like it's hard to keep a single big bear for much more than about 10 to 14 days. I've never had a 500-pound bear that just stayed on my bait for 30 straight days.
No, they'll burn out just like you. You don't want to eat steak every single night of the week.
I do.
Yeah. Most people don't, right? You can only eat Chinese buffet so many nights a week, right? Whatever it is. So, yeah, I agree. I think they do get burned out. I think there's a little more technical side to that question for me is based on when season is and when the mast falls. To me, you have to start baiting long enough in advance to get the bears on there before the mast falls first, right? Mm-hmm. So then if the mast is falling, or where we are acorns, when I say mast, that's our mast, But if I don't get him there before then, I'm probably not getting him there, right? So, we've had seasons varying in opening dates throughout history, so my process has kind of changed based on that. So now the way the season structure is, I would probably try to bait a little longer than previously, just because I know I got to get them there before the acorn fall, and then I got to try to hold them all the way to season, right?
Yeah.
If not, if the season was a little earlier and I knew I only had I knew I had X amount of days before season, I would do it a short, 2 weeks really. Like he said, established baits, if the acorns ain't falling, couple weeks. Really, 30 days is just too much time.
You had a scenario one year, I remember, when we were both trying to do these shorter baits when you didn't have bears. Mm-hmm. So you kind of got burned by it. And I remember that year because we were talking about it. We're like, man, we're just going to bait 10 days this year.
I don't think I ever had a bear come in that year.
And So the bears had already
They'd already filtered out.
they may have, Heath, they may have even moved off to other bait sites.
True. Somebody started baiting before you, or, even an established bait that maybe because of season changed the year or two before, we had started baiting at X date. And then now I'm only 10 days before season, but season was 2 weeks later. Maybe.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, we've kind of had a season that roved in a 2-week period.
So the bears may have came by before we started baiting. They're like, nothing here. I'm going to go on down to this other bait, right?
Yeah.
So I think it depends, actually, is the answer to your question. I don't want to have to bait any bear 30 days because with the volume bears we have, they just take too much bait to keep them there.
Here's the answer. The least amount of time you can.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you don't.
But you have to do it early enough to get your bears on your bait.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. So that's the key. It all kind of depends.
We're all working inside of a real world where none of us just have, it's not our full-time job to bait bears. So it's like you have a limited amount of bait. There's only so much bait you've got. There's only so much time you've got. There's only, so it's like finding that sweet spot. And some of the places Ryan's got, I think he could probably go in 5 days before season and put out bait.
Yeah, better spots and baits that have been established that many years, absolutely, as long as the acorns aren't falling.
I think a lot of guys, especially some of these guys that's just getting into it, they want to look at pictures and the baiting process. That's part of the fun. That's part of the hunt. And they want to see bear pictures as soon as possible. And you can't.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, everybody wants to do that.
To see a big bear hit the bait.
Yeah. But, if it's somewhere there's going to be bears, and say you've already been in there and done your tree stand work, trimmed out some lanes or something, you're already seeing padded out trails and stuff. So, to me, there's no reason to go ahead and start baiting 30 days before season.
Right.
But if a guy just wants to kill a bear, then by all means do it. But when we're talking about 400, 500, 600-pound bears,
here's the best case scenario. If I go to one of my baits and I put out a bait on August the 29th, and I see my target bear show up there the day I put out bait, I kind of cringe a little bit.
He's probably not going to be there in a month.
I'm just like, what are the chances I'm going to hold him for a month? Best case scenario, and this has happened many times, is my target bear shows up about a week before season. After I've been baiting for about 10 days or 2 weeks, and I'm like, okay, I can hold him for a week.
Yeah.
That's ideal.
Yep.
So I had a guy.
What's even more ideal is 2 or 3 days before season.
Yes.
I mean, this was a long story. Back when I very first started, I shot and didn't recover a big bear several years ago. One of the only times I've ever had this happen. And he showed up, and I can go through pictures and show you this too. But at least for me, I don't know what you guys see, but if a big bear comes to my bait, whenever, the first time he comes to the bait that year, I guarantee you he'll be there in daylight the next day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Every time. I had the big bear I shot show up. We'd baited a couple weeks, and there wasn't really any big bears that year. Kind of odd. A big bear showed up the night before season. And the only reason I knew that was I went in the first day of season, went ahead and baited midday, checked the cameras, pulled the card. I'm like, holy cow, this is a big bear. He came in right after dark. I don't remember. It may have been the middle of the night, but he came in that night. First time been there. And I'm like, that bear will be here in daylight today, I guarantee you. So we were planning on hunting somewhere else. Totally switched our game plan, and I did shoot the bear, but it was back when I was 25 feet in the tree, and he was right here, and I shot real low. It wasn't a fatal shot. It was a rookie mistake. Young bear hunter, still kind of learning what to do, and so he was a big bear. He wasn't 500, but he was probably 400. He was a really nice bear.
Yeah, I remember pictures of him.
He was a big bear. So I see that too. So you're right. I mean, if you could time it out to where season starts just 2-3 days after them big bears get there, I think your chances of killing them are a lot better.
That's happened. That seems to happen pretty regularly. A big bear that killed in Oklahoma the first year, that wasn't the first year I hunted over there, but I called him the no-name bear because he showed up the day before season. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a name for him. I had, all these other bears that I knew, and they were big bears, and he came in the opening day like nothing. I've also had an opening day bear bite me. Not literally, but 2 years ago, last year when I was hunting with River at the mule bait, which is a remote bait we use our mules to access, we showed up opening day. And that morning at 10 o'clock, we're there at like 1 o'clock. We've rode our mules in there, and I checked the card, and there is a monster that showed up that morning at 10 o'clock and stayed at the bait. And I told River, I said, that bear will be here. I mean, he's within 250 yards of us right now. The problem is that it was his first time to the bait, and we hadn't been there in 2 or 3 days. So he came into that bait, never smelled a human, and he came in. We watched him. I saw him. He came in at like 3:30 and got 40 yards downwind of us, smelled us, and never came back to the bait again. Mm-hmm. Now, if he had been there and 3 hours after we'd baited 3 days before, and he'd have been like, there's a human over here, but look at this good food. Do you see the scenario?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like it was the perfect timing for him to nail us.
Yeah, that was out of your control. There's nothing you can do with that.
But so you want them, these big bears have to know, and in that particular spot, that it was so remote, those bears acted like Canadian bears almost. A big bear that River shot and didn't recover, smelled us, looked at us in the tree, and just strutted in like nothing. He just kind of cautiously came in. Downwind, that color-faced bear. Mm-hmm. Like, anyway, that wasn't normal either. He usually would have winded us and left. He winded us and was just kind of like, they're up in the tree. But anyway, pretty wild.
That's odd, though. You're not going to have that happen very often.
That's odd.
And you kick yourself because you're like, man, we should have done something different, but you don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that just don't happen very often, right?
Okay, man, this is a great discussion. Okay, let's talk about what type of bait. What type of bait? What do you put out?
Whatever you can come up with. I'm going to say in the fall, you're probably going to try to do more carbohydrates than anything. That's what they're geared for in the falls, to put on weight.
That's kind of your diet too.
But aren't you you still use beavers quite a bit here? Or?
Not as much. I tell you what, when the bait's hot and heavy, you got lots of bears coming in, they will just carpet bomb a beaver carcass. But if there's not a lot of bears and that thing starts going rancid,
they don't like it.
They don't like it. It's vice versa as in Canada. I mean, them guys will use rancid meat up there, and the bears will just feast on it. Right. Down here, once you get some stank to it and maggots, then you just got a big mess. Yeah. Yeah, but on the years where there's not a lot of mast and they're hammering your baits, if you got a beaver carcass, man, it's icing on the cake.
Yeah. Now, see, I would have. Now, I've never put a beaver out in Arkansas, but I've heard of guys doing it and bears not hitting it.
Yeah.
Here now in Canada, they'll go crazy. Mm-hmm. But okay, walk me through what you put on your bait. Just list out the stuff.
Pastries, mostly pastries. Dog
just like
food,
donuts you're getting from a donut shop.
Yep, bread.
Bread that bread from a thrift store or something, white bread, wheat bread,
out of date stuff,
bagels, pita bread. Like people ask these kind of questions. We know because we've filtered through it all for all of you. But any of that stuff they'll eat.
Yeah, yeah.
Go. I'm not trying to interrupt you. I'm just adding
to corn, dog food, whatever a guy can.
Okay, now you're the one that taught me about a corn barrel. Mm-hmm. So Ryan will have probably 2 metal barrels, and we'll go ahead and say all of us are using metal barrels. Mm-hmm. I'm cutting an 8-inch hole above the lowest ring, trying to get a barrel that's got a top, like Heath said, that you can screw together. Mm-hmm. And we're just chaining that to a tree, or you can put eye bolts off the back of this barrel and chain it to a tree. There's no secret to that.
No.
Some places you can't use metal barrels. You got to use stumps and stuff.
Oh, like natural, like up north.
Like a natural. So, check your regulations. Most places you can use metal barrels. Plastic barrel is just the same, but plastic barrels usually, the lid is not as good as usually. So, or they don't have a removable lid. Yeah. So anyway, we're all using metal barrels. Just use a Sawzall and just cut about an 8-inch hole down towards the bottom. But Ryan will take a 55-gallon drum, a 2-inch circular metal saw, put 2-inch holes, maybe 7 or 8 around the base of that barrel, eye bolt coming off the back of with some big washers and an eye bolt, chain it to a
Swivel.
tree, fill it with 300 pounds of corn, and pour about 2 gallons of grease with Northwoods Gold Rush in it, and you have a corn roller barrel.
When everything else is gone, that's still going to be there just to keep them interested.
Because they'll high grade the bait.
Yep.
They'll hit, and different bears are different, but they're probably going to eat the donuts and the bread and the sardines or whatever you've put out first, and then if they just pound it, you've still got this grease barrel that they'll come in and roll around. And last year,
it takes more time too.
Yeah.
They got to roll it around. A little bit falls out.
Yep.
And, certain years it's better than others. Like I say, when there's not much natural food, they will pound the corn. But some years they don't want to touch it as much, It varies from year to year.
Yeah. Okay, so bread, grease, dog food.
Dog food, old sweets. I've used gummy worms, Skittles. You name it. I mean.
Okay. Heath, what do you use?
Same thing. I mean, there for a few years we were going in and buying semi-truckload of sweets, so it changed a little bit. The best I've ever found was donuts. They love donuts, but you can't get an unlimited supply. One year, the year I killed that bear right there, matter of fact, they had put in a new Dunkin' Donuts where I lived at the time, brand new, and they did not know how many donuts a day they needed to make. And they were literally throwing away half a truckload trash bags full of donuts every night because they were cooking too many donuts. And you could just go by and get them out of the dumpster. So one year I had for a short time, it didn't last long because they figured it out, but I had this unlimited supply of every kind of donut you could imagine that Dunkin' Donuts
You found the bird nest on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, it was unreal. And but same thing. I mean, I still, then we were using cookies, and Oreo cookies with the cream filling worked really good. Some of the ice cream sandwich cookies. Where we are, I don't use corn as much. I don't think my bears, and I think a lot of it's where you are, obviously, and the timing of season too. So early in the year, they're hitting corn right now.
Yeah.
You could just go pour out corn, and I mean, you can't even get pictures of your deer right now because the bears, right?
Yeah.
But the closer we get to season, I'd do the same thing. I'd do kind of similar to what Ryan does with popcorn, though. We were getting the big cherry popcorn or caramel popcorn for a while instead of corn.
Candy.
And I'd put it in a quasi roller barrel. It might have a bigger hole in it, but I'd chain it to the tree on just a rubber barrel. I'd still have my 2 main metal drums full of the regular stuff, but I'd fill it full of that candied popcorn, and the same thing, they could roll it around, get some of the popcorn out. And it's interesting. They're like humans to me. The one year I had Lowrider, you remember him for 2 or 3 years, big chocolate bear, biggest chocolate bear I've ever seen in Arkansas, and another big bear coming. One of those bears, and I can't remember which now, loved the popcorn. One of them would never eat it. He would always eat other big barrels. So it is personality to me too.
Yeah,
some bears like some things and some bears don't, just like the way we do, So a lot of that's just you need to check your game cameras and see what he's eating, you know. And if this one bear is not eating the popcorn all the time and he's the one that you're wanting to kill, you need to maybe try to start, he likes this more. I need to keep more of this because I want him to be coming in, right?
Yeah.
But donuts are my favorite, but you just can't ever get enough donuts.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just
harder
all
to
there's
source.
bread, grease,
Yep.
One of the things I used for a few years, I had a good connection to. You talk about fryer oil and just grease, but I had a friend that had a barbecue restaurant, and he had his big pit smoker in the restaurant, and he smoked whole new meat every night for the next day's meals. And he had a big, huge spigot on the backside of this big smoker that all the grease and drippings would run out into a 5-gallon bucket. And it was you'd want to dip a biscuit in it and eat it. It was barbecue drippings.
Did you ever do it?
Oh, it smelled so good.
You don't have to admit it.
Yeah. And so for a few years too, I would have him I'd take him buckets with lids that he could put on it good and start stocking up on that. And it had a really good strong odor. And, we'll talk about grease too, but grease gets on their feet and they track it back in the woods. And
essential
bears,
component, I feel like, for a good bear bait
Yeah.
is some sort of grease.
I mean, And even if it's just grease you buy at Walmart and you're pouring it on the ground even to get on their feet so they track it off, another bear is going to smell it and follow that track back in. So it helps the other bears in the area find your bait a lot quicker, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well, not only was I doing that, but they loved this grease because it was actually drippings out of a smoke pit. So you could put, if I didn't have donuts, I had the day-old bread store stuff. You could fill the bread, sop it in this drippings right out of the smoke pit. Holy cow, they love that. You know? So I'm sure it's like anybody else. In my experience, every year I don't always have access to the same thing.
Yeah, you kind of got to be.
Because it's
creative.
hard to get. Yeah, you know.
Especially
bait's,
nowadays.
Yeah,
when
bait's hard
a lot
to
of
get.
bear
guys are
hunting's
baiting.
really caught on.
It is,
Yeah.
and a lot of people don't want to, you know, I was getting pastries and stuff at a day-old bread store one time for quite a while. Well, they got to where they didn't want to sell them to you because some guy bought them and went and sold them to somebody, you know, and they didn't want to get sued for somebody eating a bad pastry, you know. So then they would stop giving the bear hunters the. Well, we weren't. I mean, we were having to buy them. They weren't giving them to us, but they just stopped giving them. So you're like, well, heck, there goes my whole supply of pastries. I got to find some somewhere else, you know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge undertaking, you know.
I've got a tip for people trying to get bait from like commercial places, whether it's a donut store or whether it's a thrift store, because people always want to know what you're going to do with it, and you don't lie to them. But feed bread, that's what I ask for when I call thrift stores. I'm like, do y'all have feed bread?
Right.
Because a lot of people buy this stuff for livestock.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you know, I don't ever lie, but you know,
is feed bread.
I've learned from some good people over the years that you only give as much information away as you need. Because I have for sure early on, I remember buying bread and I'd be like, man, we're baiting bears. And I mean, it's dried up before because of that.
Yeah.
That's a good tip.
Yeah, so feed bread. That's a good way to say it. A lot of people feed livestock and pigs and stuff with that stuff. Mm-hmm. Hey, let me tell you what I would do just in real short. Because to me, this isn't – people think this is like the magic bullet to killing a big bear is what kind of bait you use. I think it's a couple of notches down. I think it's less important if you have quality bait. Basically, you got to feed them what they'll eat. This is what I'll do on the first time that I bait, which will probably be in the next 10 days sometime, is I'll buy 50 pounds of cheap dog food. I'll have 5 gallons of grease, which, depending upon what I can get, I may go to Walmart and buy 3 or 4 gallons, well, maybe just 3 or 4 gallons of canola oil. And I will put my Northwoods Gold Rush in that brand new canola oil. Then I'll have my feed bread from the thrift store, which is just going to be a conglomeration of wheat bread, white bread, whatever I've got. And I will pour a 50-pound bag of dog food in that barrel, and it'll fill that barrel up almost to the bottom of my hole because I cut that hole above, about 15 inches up from the bottom of that. So there'll be dog food down there. I'll pour some grease on that dog food, maybe half a gallon of grease. And then I will literally stuff that barrel full of bread, so much so that I'm having one of my kids or me jump on the bread to compress it down into that bait barrel. Mm-hmm. And we'll put, I don't know how many pounds of bread you can put in there, but a lot, probably 200 pounds of bread. And then I'll put the lid on that thing. And depending upon if it's a really good bait that I anticipate bears pounding, I'll probably do that a second time with another barrel. And then I'll fill up my corn roller barrel. I'll set my camera in a bear box. You got to have a bear box. I mean, you might as well get a camera you can put in a bear box because the bears they may not destroy it.
They're just curious.
They're going to knock it around and they're going to turn it sideways. And I'd say there's about a 40% chance they're going to destroy it.
Yeah.
I have people that say, man, I've never had bears mess with it. It's just a matter of time if you do it much.
Especially if you got quality cameras.
Yeah.
If you have good cameras, they cost a lot of money today. You want to protect them. So
yeah.
I actually found AA batteries in bear scat before.
Have you really?
I have. No kidding.
Oh, I'll be darned.
Yeah.
Well, that's my baiting. That's typically what I'd bait.
I got
with.
one thing to add, kind of on Ryan's point. I know Ryan used to use beavers or still do sometimes. He talked about going rancid. I think sometimes we've talked about or I've done. Sometimes if you want to hold the bear a few more days and try to keep him there, and I don't mean a big bear, you can add beef scraps or beef fat or something a little different to their diet. And they don't get a lot of meat here, right? And I've tried that, and I do think it works. But I also agree with Ryan 100%. You got to be very careful because the moment that goes rancid, they stop it. Our bears here do not want rancid meat.
Bears are opportunists.
Yeah.
You know, they're kind of cumbersome. They don't get to eat red meat real often. So when there is.
But if you put too much, here's the bad scenario. If you go in there and they're hammering it and you put a bunch of bait or say a bunch of meat scraps on top of the bait and just coincidentally the acorns start falling that night, you got a mess on your hands.
Yeah.
And then it's nasty. So you got to be careful. But
Clay, you know, pork or beef fat with no meat on it, just the fat, it will last
a little bit.
Well, and that you were reading my notes, Heath, because that's what I was going to talk about. I feel like, and we've all had this conversation, is that a key to holding a bear, I think, can be to strategically add something new just before season that intrigues them a little bit. And I'll walk you through a scenario. I've had this happen multiple years, baiting a big bear, and he, the closer you get to season, the more nocturnal he becomes, the less he comes to your bait. And if you can put something new out there that he's not seen that he likes, you'll have a chance of keeping him around a little bit longer. So usually what I do is you can go to just about any butcher, like custom butcher, and buy a 50-pound box of pork fat or beef fat, frozen. It'd be a real neat, nice little box, 50 pounds for $25 to $35. I mean, it's not expensive. And then strategically put that out with your bait. Like I put it right on top of the barrel. I would go in and bait just like I described and then just put it right on top of the barrel. And I've seen bears come in and not eat a donut, not eat corn, just carry off a big slab of fat. You can do it with beef trimmings too. Like you might be able to go to a butcher and get beef trimmings. I one time watched a bear come in, walk past donuts, walk past corn, and start crunching beef bones.
Yep.
It was just that time of year. It was just like 2 weeks before, it would have probably ignored that meat, and it would have ate donuts and corn and dog food. It could have cared less about that.
At this point, though, it'd been eating those carbohydrates for a couple of weeks, I don't know, 10 days or whatever, and then you've switched to this new source of protein or meat, and they're like, wow, this is awesome, man.
That's right.
I'm hooked. I'm coming back to this Chinese buffet for a couple more days.
And that's all you need. You're just trying to get them to hang on. And so, for sure, always the time before that I bait, the last time I bait before season, man, I'm putting some good stuff out. And I'll tell you, the El Primo bait that I have never, ever, ever witnessed a bear not eat. Shh.
Don't tell it.
Don't tell them. You're right. I'm not going to tell them. They're going to have to go to our Pay For podcast.
That's right.
To get this one.
Yeah.
No, sardines. I have never not seen a bear eat a can of sardines. I've seen them walk past corn, donuts, dog food, beef, meat, a blueberry pie. I don't know. I've never seen one walk over a can of sardines. Maybe they have, but it's like gold to them. So the day before season, I usually put out a lot of sardines. And I put those out throughout the year. Me and James Lawrence, James is pretty good at finding these like bargain sardine deals, and he'll have 50 cans of sardines, and we'll eat some of them while we're baiting bears, but then we'll
I started to say James probably finds sardines for himself.
Me and James are cut from the same cloth, man. Yeah. We're like we both gain a little weight during bear baiting season. Yeah. But I think that's a key point for holding a big bear. If we're talking about big bears, you got to be consistent. You got to be where they are. You're not going to kill a big bear where there's not one. So if your bait doesn't have one, you need to find somewhere else to bait. And you can. That's the best trick I've got. I mean, like people are like, well, can you go in and do a honey burn? The day that you hunt and draw one in that hadn't been there in 4 days. I don't think so. I've never seen it work. Like there's no just like magic bullet. How do you make him not be nocturnal? That's probably the biggest question I got. I think the way to not keep one, or the way to kill one that's nocturnal is you may not be able to. There's just some bears that are probably unkillable. But you just got to keep stacking everything in your favor. You got to be in a place he's comfortable in the daytime. You got to give him the food he wants. You got to mix it up just a little bit. On that opening day, you've got to – we all think you shouldn't hunt the mornings. You should hunt the evening.
What you're talking about too, though, and here's the thing about that. I mean, it's just like if the wind's totally wrong opening day, you're not going to kill the bear if you go in there.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, I mean, we all want to go hunt, but if all of a sudden we got a rain front came in and we got that north wind, you might as well not go.
Yep.
You know,
if you're after a big one.
Yeah, it's just like deer.
Yeah.
I mean, they smell, you know, their ability to smell is better than deer. So, I mean, you got to be a smart hunter too, you know, on top of everything we're talking about.
That's right.
Yeah. Scent attractants, commercial scent attractants. We talked a little bit about Gold Rush. What's been your experience with
I've used it. I think it works. You know, last time or two I baited pretty hard. I used some of that cherry bomb spray or cherry one
burst.
of the cherry flavors from there, and would spray it up in the trees where it'd smell better and carry. And then I put some of the stuff in the grease or whatever, because I didn't use it when I had that connection to get the barbecue drippings because it had its own smell, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't need it. But yeah, if you're just using regular fry oil, you should use it. I mean, it's inexpensive for as much as it smells, and the attractant it gives the grease in your bait side, in my opinion.
I think it adds. It would be hard to put a percentage on it, really scientifically, to say how much more scent power your bait would have. But I would say it would double at least. I mean, like natural bait only has so much scent, and this stuff is chemically designed to like be loud, as Ryan says.
Yeah.
You know, to just have this loud smell. And so it's just going to carry better. It's going to carry further. It's going to stick on stuff better. And scent is everything. That's the way you're going to attract bears.
Exactly. Adding to the bears getting the grease on their paws and walking down the trails, if they got that smelly grease on there, they're going to smell it way back in there.
That's
you know,
right.
So it's going to last longer. That oil-based chemical is going to last longer on the plants when they're rubbing, going down the trail and stuff.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's the key really with the grease and the attractant, is to get as many bears as quickly as you can to know the bait's there.
Yep.
Especially if you're, you know, I mean, maybe not for 30 days, but for me, it's always I got to bait to get the bears here before acorns, and then I got to hold them till season, right?
Yeah.
So the key is I got to get all the bears in the area and know there's a bait here. Well, that grease is a huge factor in that.
You know, I also think it's important to continue to use the scents throughout the season, because just like I said earlier, you might be attracting a bear 2 days before season opener, and he may be the one you kill. Like a lot of guys, I've heard people say, and I maybe even said it, that I like to use commercial scents when I'm opening a bait. Well, I've now kind of drifted my philosophy is I like to use commercial scents the whole time, because 2 days before season, you may draw in a bear from 4 miles away that is the one you want to kill. Mm-hmm. Where if you just used it at the beginning to get some bears coming in, you know, maybe you wouldn't have got. I mean, if we're talking about best case scenario to kill big bears, I'd keep using it, especially with the Gold Rush stuff.
I agree.
Yeah. Hey, one thing we didn't say when we were talking about bait site placement is that I feel like your bait has to be on the upwind. Well, the bait scent needs to be blowing into areas that hold the bears. And I've got 2 stories. And I've told this before, so if you've listened to these kind of podcasts, you've probably heard both these stories. One time I had a bait that was on the rim of this big block of national forest. I mean, everything was beautiful about this bait, except it was on the north side of a big giant block of national forest, and north of the bait was just civilization. I mean, just farms and cattle pastures and places bears didn't want to be. Well, a south wind that whole time in September, which usually, you know, most of our winds are out of the south in September, most of them. Well, it just so happened the 3 weeks that I baited, we never got a north wind. So the wind was constantly coming out of the good bear country, blowing into all the farm country. I could never attract a bear there. You know, if we'd had a north wind, it would have blown that bait scent down into that wilderness, and the bears would have been like, oh, dang, there it is. So I believe that if I'd had the same bait that was on the south side.
Other
If you can
side.
follow my wind direction. I think that's important. Another time, I had a killer bait site in terms of area, rugged, remote, big country, and the wind was always blowing up this canyon, which is where where I came from, and really the bears were down, kind of like downstream into this big national forest. Well, I put out a bait, and for a week didn't get a bear. This is over in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And it just shocked me. No bears. How could this spot not produce a bear? Well, I did a little scent trail run with a drag. I did a little drag down on the property and got just around the point of these two big ridges. Basically, I had to be low, and there were two big ridges, and I was between them. I drug that scent just out beyond where those ridges came down, and it was a whole new draft of wind, I felt like. And within 24 hours, I had a bear. Just did a scent drag, that just got my bait scent into a little bit different current. Yeah. And so that's important for attracting bears.
Before, yeah. And if you can't, and here's a flip side of that bait is going to be better for you to hunt if you have a big bear coming, because he's not going to smell you.
That's right.
So setting them up like that and then doing a drag to get the bears there, then having the grease there for the bears to disperse the scent for you, it actually makes it a better spot to hunt. It's just harder to get the bears to come to it. You got a little more work you got to do for that.
Yeah.
So that's good. I've done that before, done a drag, and not probably as far as you did, but just over the ridge down, just to kind of, and then drag back out. And I mean, it don't take no time. Bam, they follow that trail right in. And then the bears are leaving their scent, and they're creating trails everywhere. So you don't have to. All you got to have is one bear come in. If you get one bear come
You'll tell all the rest of them.
All the rest of them are going to figure it out. But you got to get the one bear to come in first.
What would you guys say? We've covered everything we said we were going to cover. What do you think people would have questions about? Like how to set up trail cameras. I almost want to talk about where to shoot a bear, like how to set up your stands and stuff.
I think an important subject is basically getting your stand set up, everything done before you even bait. Have everything, like say, turnkey.
Absolutely.
And not being there tinkering around, even when you're baiting. Just go in, bait, get out.
That way the bear, first time he comes in, the stand's already there.
Yeah. You don't want to be in a climbing stand opening day and clanking up a tree.
I hate climbing stands.
Yeah. Get all
for baiting bear.
Get all your homework done right off the bat before you even bait, and it's ready to go come opening day.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
How high do you put your stands, Heath?
Honestly, for bear baits now, and I've got to where I put ladder stands 15 to 18 feet maybe.
How far is the bait away from your stand?
20 yards or less. 18, 20 yards usually my sweet spot.
About the same for you?
Same thing.
You get up higher than that, though, don't you?
I think it depends on your terrain a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're too far downhill in some of the scenarios, then I might need to be a little bit further.
Well, where I'm going to is shot angle.
Shot angle.
Yeah.
I used to think I needed to be 25 feet up in a tree.
And that burnt me big time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a hard angle for deer, any critter, to be shooting at a super steep angle. But I feel like a big bear or any bear is pretty dang unforgiving.
Yeah, the two I have now, I have permanent ladder stands that just stay there.
Right.
I mean, I never move them, change the straps. One of them's probably a 15-footer, and one of them's an 18-footer, but it's more steep off the end of the point. So in our reality, it's probably only 15 feet above kind of the ground level there.
Right.
You know?
I always, kind of the sweet spot that I've found, and Bernie Behringer has kind of helped me, or he has some pretty good philosophies on this too, but be 16 to 19 feet high and have the bait barrel 18 yards away.
Yeah.
You're up high enough that your wind is a little bit better, but you're not up so high that your angle's super steep. 18 yards is just far enough that a bear is.
In our reality, both of my good spots are probably 17 to 18 yards from the bait.
You don't want to be 25.
Yeah, no.
I've been to some Canadian hunts where they got a bait barrel 25 yards out there, and I'm like, that's too far. Mm-hmm. I mean, I could just shoot it 25 yards.
Right, yeah.
But why? I just don't think it's necessary. But you don't want to be 10 yards from them either. That's kind of a sweet spot. Really 15 to 20 feet, 18-ish yards. You don't want to be right on top of them. And that angle is super crazy. Now, just because we're getting close to opening day, let's real quickly go through shot placement stuff. And this is a whole podcast. I think me and you did a whole podcast on shot placement. Mm-hmm. We did. Yeah. And that podcast is still up, and I'll refer people to that. It's called Dummy's Guide to Shot Placement on Bear, and we nerd out for an hour or longer just about shot placement. But the biggest thing that I would say is a bear is not as big as he looks. He's got 3 inches of hair all the way around his body. He's got fat. And so the biggest thing that I've seen people mess up on is shoot them too low.
Yeah, you do not shoot them like a whitetail.
You don't want to try to heart shoot a bear.
Because they don't duck like a whitetail for
That's
one.
right.
I mean, that's the whole key. That's another podcast. But, deer duck, bears don't.
That's right. That's exactly. The reason we aim low and tight on a whitetail is because that animal is going to move at the sound of the string. Yep. He's going to drop and then lunge to get away.
You're always going to hit him a little higher than you're aiming. A bear's not that case. Yeah. I mean, you should be able to pick out a tick on the bear and hit the tick. He ain't moving.
Yeah. Yeah.
At 18 yards, maybe at 30 or something.
Right.
But
so that's the biggest thing. Don't shoot them too low.
Right.
And listen to this. This is my new philosophy on where the vitals of a bear are at. And we could go look at your bear over here. We've said for years, and I've said for years, that a bear's vitals are slightly further back than a whitetail. Functionally, that is true. But in reality, his shoulders are further up on his body. Mm-hmm. Y'all see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like a whitetail, you can see his brisket stick out on the north side of his shoulders.
Yeah.
And then his neck starts, and so their anatomy is actually really similar in terms of organs. I mean, if we're getting super technical.
Yeah.
But a bear doesn't have a brisket that hangs out in front of his shoulders. If we look at that bear mount over there, his shoulders come up and his neck immediately starts. Mm-hmm. And so his shoulders and legs are more forward than a deer. So what that translates into is that you have more space for vitals further, what seems to be further back on a bear. Yeah. And so, people say, there's a phrase a lot of Canadian outfitters use, middle of the middle. Mm-hmm. And they literally mean aim at the dead nuts, excuse my French, middle of a black bear and shoot it. Which if you did that with a whitetail, you would be hitting him in the liver.
Yep.
Well, with a bear, you're going to be hitting him kind of in the back of the lungs. I don't like to go middle of the middle. I like to go middle of the middle and then back towards the shoulder about 4 inches. But the point is you can hit them further back. The second point is I have seen this. I've killed quite a few bears, but more than that, I've tracked a ton of bears in Canadian bear camps over the years and Arkansas bear. I mean, I've tracked a lot of bears. You can shoot a bear in the absolute guts, which you don't want to do, and you can find that bear relatively easy. He's going to die within 300 yards. You're going to have to put on your blood trailing cap.
Give him time to expire.
And you're going to have to give him time. But so the point of all that is to say, in the whitetail world, the biggest fear you have is hitting one far back. Or at least that's what we've been told our whole lives. Don't hit him far back, man. Gut shot that deer. And that's true. That is not the worst case scenario with a black bear, in my opinion. I mean, Colby, there's a great video on Bear Hunting Magazine YouTube of our buddy Colby just absolutely shooting one deep in the guts. And, I mean, it just makes you go, ooh, man, we found that bear, no problem. River Newcomb last year. Ryan helped me track River's bear. She 10-ring that sucker in the guts. I mean, we had to blood trail it, but we found it relatively easy the next day.
Yeah.
I mean, 30-minute blood trail. And, it went 300 yards probably. But point being, I think people are so afraid to shoot them far back, they want to shoot them tied up against that shoulder, and they hit the shoulder. And you are guaranteed if you hit that scapula or the actual shoulder bone of that bear, you're not going to kill it.
And I've done that too.
Yeah.
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 And you don't want to hit them low. because you'll shoot. I mean, I've done that, especially if you're at
Yep.
any angle in a tree stand, because they're not going to duck, so you're going to shoot low, hair, brisket. I mean, you might clip a artery or something there, but yeah, I mean, I like to shoot them. I still shoot them probably not as middle as most people, but I'm probably going to shoot them a full, and I say hand. My hand's probably 9 inches wide. I'm going to put them a hand width behind the shoulder, the arm. You
that's
know what I'm
about
saying?
what I like to do.
I mean,
it gives you more room for error, Heath.
Yeah.
If you
I
hug
got
that shoulder,
9 inches to hit this way, and I still got 9 or probably more. But at 18 yards, as good as we practice and shoot now, you should hit right pretty daggum close to that spot. He's not moving.
yeah. Well, and see, that's the logic. And if we're talking about, you can kill one bear doing something kind of crazy, and statistically, you might win the statistics war. If you shoot 10 bears, you want to do the best case scenario. And so if you hug that shoulder, you've only got room for error to the south. By south, I mean back on the bear. You scooch it over, and then you got room for error towards the shoulder. You got room for error behind the shoulder. And then the worst thing you can do is hit a bear on the fringe. And that would be with whitetails or anything else. You hit a bear too high, you're not going to find him. You hit a bear too low, even in the cavity, and you may not find that bear. I mean, I think the bear you probably shot that you talked about
in the cavity. Yeah,
yeah, and
I blood trailed that bear like he was pouring blood out of a bucket for a quarter of a mile. But I know I just shot right under his heart, probably. You know, and at the angle, I may actually not have got the heart. It went in here and probably came out right there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it's just a rookie mistake. I mean, I just pulled up, aimed right where I would shooting whitetail that I've killed the 100 of, and that wasn't where I needed to shoot him. You know, I mean,
Well, the only other thing I would say in terms of shot placement is best case scenario is going to be a broadside standing bear. Bears do all kind of weird stuff when they come into a bait. They can sit down on their rump. They can stand up. They can lay down.
They can cup their body.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, that's the biggest thing, Ryan, and you've heard me preach about that, is a bear has so many contortions of his body that he can do that a whitetail can't. A whitetail is almost like this linear, like static animal for the most part. I mean, like they're either going to be like a bear is like a cat almost. Like he can cup his body. So, and bears are black, which is a color that just soaks up its surroundings, and its hair is long. A whitetail has short hair. You can see every crease in his body. You can see his shoulder line. You can see everything. A bear is like shooting at an inflated black trash bag.
Well, the thing about big bears especially is, and we all know this, other than, Ryan killing one he walks up on, all the really big bears I've ever killed, it's been within 3 minutes of shooting light.
Yeah.
Oh, is that right?
Or 5. I mean,
late.
Just like that one. I mean, he may have came up over the ridge 30 minutes before dark, but he didn't come in there till 3 minutes before legal shooting light,
Yeah.
So it's almost dark anyway, and then you're shooting at this black blob. Literally at that time, he's just a black blob with all this big hair on him, And so, I mean, I've killed him, don't get me wrong, I've killed not old big bears earlier in the day, but these bears like this don't come in often until it's almost last light, at least in my experience.
So you got to be real careful where you shoot him. And you just want him to be standing up. You don't want him to be cupped towards him, which that would mean he would be standing broadside, but his shoulders and his hips would be closer to you than the offside rib cage, if that makes sense. And so you might think, I've been in a stand more than once watching someone shoot, no names being named here, where they thought they were aiming right behind the shoulder, and they actually hit right where they were aiming. But when that bear straightened back out, that arrow was 18 inches back. I mean, and we may have still found a bear, but it wasn't a 10-ring double lung shot. There, he's going to run 30 yards.
And you can use your bait setup to make a bear stand the way you want him to shoot him to. The way your barrels are angled. I know I don't do this so much, but some guys may lay some logs behind the bait so the bears have to come in on this side and turn and face the barrel, and they're slightly quartering away, maybe just not a lot, but slightly 15 degrees or something that you can slide.
Every time I've
and,
done that, the bears just tromp it to the ground.
Yeah.
I've done it many times.
Yeah.
And they always, because you're always trying to block it the way that they naturally want to come.
I just use the barrel openings.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, just pointing them.
oftentimes, especially when they first come in there, they'll kind of square up with it in the beginning to look in the hole and reach in the hole. Now, they're going to do all kinds of stuff after that.
Yeah.
But when they first walk in there, oftentimes it seems like they'll square up with that hole, which if you got two barrels there, it might be either one, but it's broadside enough that at 18 yards you should make a perfect shot on it, right?
And you don't have to be usually in any hurry on a bear at a bait site. You
That's
can
right.
Be pretty
Unless
patient.
light,
unless light
in
is
my
fading like you're talking
situation on
about.
the big ones, it's always fading light, and we're in the timber, so you walk out of the timber up on the ridge, it might still be daylight, but it gets dark in the timber a lot sooner, you know.
Yeah.
And on mine sites, I'm always on that north side of the mountain, so it's getting darker there before the south side of the mountain. So I run out of daylight a lot sooner there than you probably would in some other locations. But it's the locations that I've found that I can successfully get them in there in the daylight without being winded and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, man, I think we've really covered a lot of good stuff here. I'll throw the only secret weapon. The only, man, we're shutting this down. This is the pay for part. You can go to Bear Hunting Magazine. Only people that get a subscription to the magazine get this silver bullet. The only silver bullet that I've ever found in baiting bears is a redneck blind.
I agree 100%. We had that conversation years before you got it.
Yeah.
I mean, I told you we had talking about wind swirling and stuff. I'm like, the only way to kill a bear every time and he not know you're there is being a scent type blind.
And, and not just a redneck, but, whatever.
Well, I mean, whatever brand.
Yeah,
that's what we have.
Seal type.
There's a jillion of them out there.
And, I mean, people would have, if they followed the podcast, they would know this, but I hunted a bear. We got access to a property in 2015, I think. And it was 14. For 5 years, I had pictures of this bear I called Batman and never saw the bear. Totally nocturnal. He just would read your mail. Like you just couldn't kill him. I put up a redneck blind and I killed him the first day I put up a redneck blind. And I had things in my favor. It was a good mast year.
Yeah.
Like in terms of there wasn't much mast. He was responding to bait. But he came in and that bear was used to me or James Lawrence climbing up in the tree on opening day. And I guarantee he just knew we were there and he didn't come in.
And he come in really comfortable when the day you did shoot him.
Oh, yeah. It was
Here's
broad
the deal.
daylight.
If he can't smell you and don't think you're there, he's going to be like just any other day. That's why that works so well and that's why I use those drains to try to keep the bears from coming in behind me is those big bears are circling down there sniffing before they're coming in.
They're not coming in blind.
And here's the deal too, and the reality is even some of these bears that I might have fooled their nose when they come in there, they know you're there most of the time. This bear walked right to the base of my tree and looked at me, and he did not wind me. He knew I was there somehow. I had to let him turn and walk away from the stand to shoot him.
Wow. That's unusual.
It is. I mean, but had I been in there, I mean, the wind wouldn't, I don't know. I mean, he just knew, bears are just smart. He may have just went by and checked that stand every day too. I don't know. And that day I just happened to be in it before he came to, he would like circle down on that secondary point and it may just come up to the barrel,
Man, I tell you what, a lot of people that bait bears would understand this, but what we have, like me following you guys bear baiting or bear hunting in Arkansas, man, it is an awesome thing to kill a big bear.
Oh yeah,
they're like a ghost, man.
Yep.
I mean, Heath's video I think is up on it was on our DVD.
Yeah, probably was.
Bear Horizon, I think season 1. Heath killed that 504-pound bear right there.
Yeah.
And man, I tell you what, it's fun to kill big whitetails and it's fun to kill big elk. I've never done it, but I'm going to in 3 weeks. And those things can never be replaced. I mean, like this, it's like your kids, It's like you love your kids.
My love is whitetail. Don't get me wrong. You'd probably tell by looking in here. But a lot of bear stuff. But a bear makes your heart beat in a different way than a whitetail will.
It does. And these big ones.
It's hard to explain.
When I killed Batman 2 years ago, and that was the biggest bear I ever killed, and maybe the biggest bear I ever killed in my life. I felt like it was those fleeting moments that you are in the presence of a true monarch of the woods are pretty special moments as a hunter, and they're quick. I mean, like, I hunted that bear for 5 years. I watched him with my own eyes for about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And, it's a pretty cool thing to see those bears,
And people don't realize how big they really are. You
Yeah.
know? I mean, I think it's probably just like a moose or whatever. They're huge. But, I mean, I've killed big bears before. And even you walk up on a 500-pound bear with a head that big laying on the ground, you're awestruck. I am awestruck.
Yeah.
I'm not saying everybody would be, and I've done it, and I'm just still like, holy cow, look how big this thing is, you know? I mean, it's just impressive, and it's an interesting feeling. We have a great, in my opinion, a phenomenal resource here in Arkansas to be able to hunt bears like this, and so it's pretty cool to have that opportunity.
Yeah. Yep.
I agree.
Well, guys, hey, we've pounded the ground pretty hard here, covered a lot of good stuff. So, yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks for sharing your wisdom.
Yeah, it was fun hanging with you guys.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me on.
Well, keep the wild places wild, because that's where the bears live.
That's right.